Welcome to the TDK Ventures podcast with Oliver Fitz-Gibbon of InMotion Ventures. He is based in London. We will be exploring best practices of platform teams in corporate venture capital firms in the way they engage with the corporate parent and with the startups that they invest in. Well, welcome, Oliver.
Thank
How
you
are
very
you
much for
doing
having me,
today?
Geetha. I'm good, thank you. It's a dark and cold wintry evening in London, but looking forward to talking all things CVC and platform, and thank you for spotlighting this part of the industry. I think we often get overlooked, so it's nice to have the chance to talk about the other side of corporate venture capital.
Absolutely. So we have done this a few times in the past, and I want to continue this. Like you said, it's a part that's not talked about too much, but this is the core of what corporate venture capital does, which is engaging our corporate parent with our startups we invest in. So very pleased to have you with us. Just to set the context, tell us a little bit about InMotion Ventures. How did it come about, and um, what areas are areas of your focus?
Happy to. Yeah. So InMotion Ventures, we are a wholly owned subsidiary of JLR, Jaguar Land Rover. So we are an off the balance sheet evergreen fund, but we look quite different today to how we did when we were first established. So we were set up in 2016. And when the fund or the venture unit was created, OEM, internal combustion engine sales were performing very well. The business, JLR, understood the importance of monitoring new technologies for investment, but strategic meant a very different thing to what it does today. So back in 2016, we were focused on new business models. We were looking at the future of automotive industry. We were investing in areas such as travel, experiences, mobility. And in 2022, so a couple of years ago almost, we underwent a big reset. And the goal of that was really to align what we were doing a lot closer with JLR's wider business strategy. And that was because the senior leader at JLR really understood that investments have a role to play in the transformation of the business rather than just being exploratory. So today, in terms of our thesis, we say we exist to accelerate the strategic transformation of JLR, but importantly, we look a lot broader than automotive or mobility. And I like opportunities because I get the chance to explain that just because we're in the investment arm of Jaguar Land Rover doesn't mean we look at only cars. So the verticals we're investing in are quite simple. It's climate, industrial, and enterprise technologies. We invest seed to Series A, although we do have the flexibility to go later if we need to with sufficient pull from the business, and we have a few pre-seed. In terms of check sizes, we co-invest, so we don't typically lead rounds, but we invest 250,000 up to about 2 million, again with a bit of flexibility to go larger if there's a strong pull from the business. And the areas we actually invest in are North America, Europe or Western Europe, Israel, and of course the UK. And our team members are based in London, in the Bay Area, where you are, and we have a team member in Tel Aviv. And I guess the final thing to mention is the portfolio is relatively small. So there's only 22 active portfolio companies, and I don't see that changing or going too much larger, or maybe get to about 30. We don't want to get to a huge portfolio.
When you grow very fast, you get a lot of portfolios, and it's a little bit hard to balance the different requirements and also connect them with the parent. You're right. So
Mhm.
thank you for setting the context. So I'm sure the audience would like to learn a little bit more about you because this is such a unique role, the platform role or the engagement role in CVCs. And there is no one single path to this. And people come to this with varied interests and varied backgrounds and experience and education. So this is a question I ask of our interviewees. What is your background? How did you come to be at CVC, and how did you come to be in a platform?
Yeah, and again, I love these opportunities because I had a non-linear and slightly different path into VC, not the normal MBA consulting investment banking path. And when I graduated a long time ago, candidly, a lot of these non-investment roles at funds didn't exist, or if they did exist, they were few and far between. And I wish there was more out there that educated people on it, so I could have found it a bit sooner. In terms of me personally, I spent the early stages of my career at various sales and marketing agencies, some very large, such as Ogilvy, some a lot smaller, working with everyone from big tech to consumer businesses we know and love, like Nike and Converse, through to high growth startups and investors. And the common thread, and it's interesting looking back now in hindsight, the common thread between my roles has always been acting as that translator, the translator between clients and my teams, between departments, but ultimately being the bridge between different groups of stakeholders who have the same ambitions, but maybe think or operate differently. So pulling everyone together and trying to, work towards that common goal, speaking both languages. In terms of how I truly discovered VC, corporate venture capital platform, in the role prior to where I am now, I was working at a consultancy that was founded by two ex VCs out in the Bay Area. And they helped funds or startups position themselves in the market, help raise their own funds, help raise venture capital for their business or grow their pipelines. And what I noticed is that a lot of my clients in those roles were VC platform people. So I had this light bulb moment where I thought, okay, this is interesting. There's a path for me in this industry. And we did a project with Shell Ventures, who I'm sure you know. And what I got excited about was that here was a fund or a company that was crystal clear on their value add. And I've spent a lot of time with generalist funds, all claiming to add value and claiming to be fan friendly. But I came across a corporate fund and I thought, wow, this offering is so clear. There's such a differentiator, and I'd love to get into that world. I started exploring it, found out about InMotion, and the rest is history. And I've been here for 3 years.
Birthday. So very different path from me and very different path from some of the other interviewers. So we come, like I said, from all backgrounds. I myself was a scientist before, and TDK Ventures being a deep tech fund. Hopefully, some of that deep tech background and exposure helps. But you're almost a deep tech fund and invest in verticals that have quite a bit of overlap with TDK Ventures, but a very different approach to enabling corporate and portfolio engagements. Very nice to hear. So you mentioned a little bit about the investment verticals and the number of portfolios. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more? So you started in 2016, um, a- and went through COVID, I'm sure, and then uh, post-COVID. So if you can tell us, you've been with them 3 years, so not through the entire duration of the fund, but from your knowledge, if you can tell us how have you uh, progressed in the journey as a CVC, and how has your approach to engagement partnerships changed over the course of the few years? Because we were started in 2019 during COVID, and um, we have invested in a lot of verticals in the deep tech area. And I wouldn't say we have changed a whole lot in the philosophy of our how we find the king of the hill portfolios that we want to invest in. But we certainly have become a little more experienced when it comes to how we enable engagements with our corporate parents. So anything that you would like our audience to know would certainly be very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So as mentioned, when we first were set up back in 2016, we looked very different, but we also operated very differently. So we are a separate legal entity, a wholly owned subsidiary, like I mentioned, but we were always somewhat kept at arm's length. And what we've done over time with this big reset, like I mentioned earlier, is really align ourselves a lot closer with the strategic ambitions of the business. Perhaps what would be useful is if I give a bit of insight into the verticals themselves. Obviously, climate, industrial, enterprise are pretty broad. One thing I would say, as it relates to the conversation, is we say now there's an ongoing discussion always in CVC around the strategic to financial. Where do you sit on the x-axis? What we found is actually it's not the best way to categorize funds because there are very few people that sit at either of these extreme ends. Everyone's somewhere in the middle. So we say that we are strategically focused, but financially driven. And what we mean by that is we are guided by the interests and the needs of JLR, but every investment has to stand up on its own as a financially sound decision with the opportunity, most importantly, for venture style returns. And something our MD, Mike, always says, and it's hard to disagree, is there's nothing strategic about losing money, right? You have to make sure you're not viewed as a cost center. So that's the backdrop. In terms of the verticals themselves, climate, when we say climate, we are talking specifically about electrification. So everything around grid balancing, battery management systems, battery research, etc. That obviously is very broad. We're also looking at industrial decarbonization, and that's everything from carbon capture to raw material production. And then the other one, which is a big one for us, is advanced materials. So things like low carbon material, recycled leather, bio leather, plant-based coatings. So that's the climate area. And within each of those verticals, there are, well, there's probably about a list of 50 technologies that we're looking to invest in. And you can see those on our website, InMotionVentures.com. So we don't hide those. We're quite clear. Going back to industrial, so the areas we mean when we say industrial are engineering, everything from design, simulation, manufacturing, and that's pretty broad. A big focus for us next year will be robotics. It's something we're very excited about, but bluntly haven't done a huge amount so far in the way of robotics investment. And the big one is also supply chain for us. So supply chain resilience, how are we reducing our dependency on areas like China, clearly. The last bit, and I suppose also probably quite relevant to yourself as well, is enterprise. So we're looking at areas such as applications, business intelligence, infrastructure, and then dev tools. And of course, AI. We don't often say we are an AI investor because AI is implicit across all of those areas. But you can see we have a broad focus, but within our thesis, we're very clear on what we're looking at. And if you compare that to 2016, when we're investing in ticketing platforms and ride sharing, it's a world away. And that's because, like I said earlier at the start, JLR as a business is actively looking to, or will actually benefit from these kind of investments.
Brought up a lot of insight. So not only have you changed in the focus, you've in a way become more of a deep tech fund with hardware deep tech as well as the software layer that enables pretty much all of these verticals. Very good to know. So it's quite a few years of experience in enabling these engagements. So, in your opinion, how would you define a platform role in InMotion Ventures? By the way, you have a very nice website, very clean, very neat, very easy to read. So I did see that there is a platform function. So would like to learn more from you. What, in your opinion, is platform or CVCs?
Yeah, happy to. And it's funny because platform is a fairly unknown function in the VC world, and it's an even lesser known function in the CVC world, right? So the way I think about platform at a high level is it is all of the activities, services, initiatives at a fund beyond direct investment that either source new deals, support the portfolio company, or in the case of corporate funds, support the sole LPs or the corporate parent. Now, clearly, that as a definition, the one I've just given you is an incredibly broad term, and you might speak to 10 different people doing similar roles to myself and get 10 different definitions. But what we are seeing and what I'm very excited about is that across the VC landscape and the CVC landscape, platform, business development, whatever you want to call it, is becoming a non-negotiable function. And often, in fact, in almost all cases, funds that have that non-investment arm to them are outperforming the ones that don't. So that's a big tick. We're going in the right direction. In terms of InMotion Ventures, when I first joined 3 years ago, there was no platform strategy in place. It hadn't really been thought about in any great depth. So I spent the first few months here really defining what platform meant for us, not just for the industry, but for us. And at a tactical level, that meant interviewing our team, interviewing our founders, which was interesting, should we say. Understanding our fund level objectives and then combining those with my personal skills to really build a strategy. And again, going down a level more literally, what does platform mean at InMotion Ventures? Well, there are two elements to it. If we think about the fund level objectives, it's quite simple. We want to build pipeline and we want to establish market presence in our new verticals. The reason I say that is a lot of people still think we're automotive. So this is all about educating the market. And part of my role is, or the way I like to think about it, is filling the funnel, top of the funnel stuff. So a big part of that is marketing communications. So selling InMotion Ventures to the external audience, selling the dream, convincing the founders to take our money, convincing investors to co-invest with us. So that's strategic communications, brand marketing, etc. The other side of my role, as is more applicable to what we're talking about, is focus more on internal stakeholders. And I like to think about this as customer success. So part of my job is building the funnel. The other half is the reverse of the funnel, coming good on all the promises we've made to our founders. And as that relates to us, it's fairly obvious, right? It's introductions to Jaguar Land Rover, it's facilitating proof of concepts, it's removing blockers, and of course, helping with commercial discussions. But also the kind of direct one-to-one support that that often goes unnoticed. So things like giving founders the right introductions to suppliers, giving them help with pricing, introductions to maybe other customers. So we all have strong networks of CVCs. Where possible, we'll introduce them to other corporates. And of course, the classic co-investor or follow-on investor introductions. So two sides to the role. There's quite a clear split. I don't know exactly what that weighting is. It depends on the time of year and what way the wind's blowing. But what I like about it is you're involved through the entire life cycle, right from the sourcing to the supporting, which is great.
It's more than two sides. I think it's multifaceted because not only do you help usher the right and the startups into JLR and invest in them, but you not just help with engaging them with the parent, but also with the parents' partners, with the parents' clients. So it's a full ecosystem uh, help. That's I'm sure exceptionally valuable to the startups who, if they had taken money, say from a VC, which doesn't offer these, or even from a CVC that doesn't offer all of these uh, extended support, would have to do this by themselves. So I'm sure it's very very valuable, and your portfolios definitely feel that. Thank you for elaborating on that. So we spoke a little bit about the history of InMotion Ventures, how you have transitioned, and your role. Uh, Putting it back a little bit earlier, so could I ask you, how does InMotion Ventures go about picking your startups?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess there are different lenses to look at this through. The first one is maybe at a sourcing level. So we've spent a lot of time with decision makers within JLR and increasingly the wider Tata group, mapping where innovation is happening, taking time to understand where business units are innovating in house, where perhaps they're looking for the support of external players, and bluntly, which technologies they are personally most excited about. And the reason we've done that is it means we can fine tune our thesis in a way that makes a difference to those teams. So, I mean, we've talked about it already. Within our three buckets, climate, industrial, and enterprise, that list of technologies we're looking at, that list of 50 or so, has been shaped in collaboration with business units within JLR. So that's how we think about sourcing, I suppose, at the screening and the due diligence level. Once you've found a startup we like, our team, will engage the BUs, business units at the corporate level for support with the technical analysis. If we're investing in a battery, a battery management system or a battery tech startup, there is no better person than the head of battery technology at JLR to validate that approach that we're considering. So they will take that part of it, and obviously our team will then take on the necessary financial analysis. And as I mentioned before, we are strategically focused, but that financial bit is so important to us. It's also important to mention that we do not require a contract in place from JLR to make the investment. There is no set commitment to working with the startup, and there's no guarantee of it, being totally honest. But we do like to understand, or at least see that there is a potential pathway for that technology into the business. And if we do our jobs correctly, which is easier said than done, you would hope to see some level of collaboration between the companies at some point. So that's, I suppose, how we think about it in terms of a sourcing and a selection and a due diligence process.
And let's assume that you found your perfect startup and there is a promise of um, collaboration with the parent. And now you have invested and they've come on board as your portfolio company. What does the journey look like for them going forward? How do you reach out to the JLR groups that have probably been already informed about an interest in investing in the startup, as well as the groups that you might later find are probably quite a good fit? And so, how was that process enabled?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, we invest now at the early stage typically, and in my view, there's a direct correlation between stage and ease of collaboration if you're set up correctly. So at JLR, early stage interactions or engagements are typically going to come in the form of POCs, of pilots, of design partnerships, all avenues that allow both parties, corporate and startup, to learn from one another, to collaborate with one another without the commercial pressure that often accompanies a growth stage investment. So at this level, I wouldn't say at all it's easy to facilitate collaborations, but the commitment, both at a financial and resource level, are a lot lower. And what that means is, in our experience, at least over the last few years, is that resistance to startups is less of a challenge. And whatever blockers or challenges you do encounter are usually easier to resolve than perhaps the later stage investments. In terms of, I guess, how we make this happen and how we make sure these projects are moving forward, the big one for me is that you have to have that level of alignment. I mean, we've talked about it earlier about how our thesis has been built in collaboration with the business units. For me, successful portfolio collaboration between your portfolio and parent company starts by being hyper clear on why you exist and building your thesis around that mission. And the one liner that I always like to say is that collaboration challenges are solved for at the thesis level, because we know exactly what areas are important to the business. We know which teams are more likely to work with us. We have a very strong pull from internal stakeholders post investment, and connecting the portfolio is, like I said, it's not easy, but there's that pull, and those business units, those SMEs, would have been involved almost pre-deal. And there are many CVCs where people in my role spend weeks or months, or I've heard even years, hunting around the business for a home for this technology, essentially pushing the technology in. And in fact, I think that's still the norm. And to me, it feels incredibly difficult, right? It's finding a home for something that you don't entirely know where it lives. And obviously, when it's a success, it's a huge success. But I do think that must present some real challenges that, fortunately, because we are solving at the thesis level, we don't encounter them as often as we might do.
Yeah, so whatever you said brings up a set of interesting questions. First of all, relating to the stage of the technology. If it is really at the cutting edge and it's going to be something that the public will see as a user, maybe a decade from now, it's really hard to find a fit with the business group because the business groups are focused on the next quarterly goals, and it's very hard to um, find a home or find a collaboration opportunity. The first question in this regard is: do you find it easier to enable collaborations with certain groups, like the R&D groups within the business entities, that may be more familiar with these kind of technologies, as opposed to actually finding a home in core business focused groups that are more into, say, production or manufacturing. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think just going back to the point before, it's for me, the ease of collaboration. So we typically are looking at, well, it varies, but often we are looking at Horizon 2, maybe Horizon 3 um, opportunities. Going back to my earlier point, I think the ease of collaboration comes in the early stage. So we've actually had quite good success with future looking technologies at the early stage, because that resistance isn't there's less resistance because the stakes are, being totally honest, the stakes are lower, right? There's less investment required. You might be running a POC. There might be something that someone has thought about, but they haven't really understood the way in which they approach that challenge, and we can come in with an offering for a relatively low cost that allows them to test a thesis or an idea they've had. Going back to your point around certain business units, without wanting to throw anyone under the bus, there are absolutely certain areas of the business that we've had huge success with, and who are incredibly receptive to the work we're doing. And there are other parts of the business that are maybe almost running away from us. There's a reason we've done more investments in the climate sector than we have in other sectors. But equally, you can't. Time is precious, right? And from our point of view, we're a small team. We can't spend a huge amount of time trying to push opportunities into the business. Equally, there has to be an understanding, to your point, that for us, our portfolio, the opportunities that we're bringing to JLR and the POCs are potentially some of the biggest things we're working on. For our peers over at the corporate who have production deadlines, who are under a huge amount of pressure, who need to cut costs, this POC that we're pitching them is one in a long list of things they're working on, and it's often the bottom of that list. So we were talking about this the other day. I think the real skill in this role is almost empathy and understanding that people aren't there to make your life difficult. They just have their biggest challenges or bigger challenges. And the way we found to win is to identify who within the business gets innovation, who's interested in working with you, who has budget, who has political power, and focus all your efforts there, because you could spend a long time going around in circles otherwise.
Very true. Very true. So identifying the right stakeholders who have a shared vision of enabling innovation and enabling partnerships, and with the understanding that they have their own challenges and it has to work within the gambit of all of this makes perfect sense. And it's actually nice to speak to a a fellow in the same role that understands these challenges, because it's not always the case that I mean, if you speak to the same community, you understand these, and you probably get to learn. But even in the broader CVC ecosystem, if the focus is mostly on the investment side, you don't get to appreciate these challenges that much. So it's nice to talk about these things. So I assume that you have a good POC that's been introduced to your business unit and they have started to engage. How do you track the progress of this engagement over time? And when do you step in, and do you need to step in, or does it take care of itself? And what, in your opinion, would be a successful collaboration?
Yeah. So in terms of tracking progress, we judge ourselves based on the impact we're having on the portfolio, of course. So how has our investment allowed them to scale, access new markets, develop a product, raise their next round, especially at the early stage, and then clearly the impact we're having on JLR. So how has our activity unlocked, cost efficiencies, co-development opportunities, new ways of thinking? Now, when I joined InMotion Ventures 3 years ago, and I alluded to it earlier, I had some challenging conversations with our founders, and the conversation really went a bit like this. I said, are you happy with the engagement you had with JLR? And they said, not at all. We took your money because we wanted access to the mothership, because we thought there would be a parts of collaboration. And bluntly, we didn't used to have the mechanisms to do that. And that's frustrating, because we talked about it at the start. The beauty of the CVC model is there's one thing you can do that no other fund in the world can do. So for you, it's access to TDK. For me, it's access to JLR. And if you are not delivering on that, you're I suppose you're not coming good on the promise you made in that pre-investment activity. So that was where we came from. Today, however, 90% of our portfolio or our active portfolio are actively engaged with JLR in some way. And about 35% or maybe one third of them have either a contractual relationship or are in the later stage of the procurement process. So we've we've made a real step change from where we were before. In terms of, more kind of tactically, how do we measure progress? The ultimate goal, especially as we're investing at the early stage, is to see an increase in the level of interaction between startup and JLR. So if we're starting with a POC, we would then say, well, hopefully that'll move to the next stage. That could be a design partnership, or it could be immediately into the procurement process. And our long-term ambition, and we'll see how this progresses, seeing as we're still looking at the early stage and a few years in, our long-term ambition is to get as many people as possible to the end of that x-axis, which is the commercial agreement. Now, clearly that isn't possible with everyone. And as we know, commercial discussions, especially in automotive, can take years. But for us, that is a real measure of progress. The other thing we're looking at a lot closer, or starting to look at more closely, is the wider Tata Group. So I mentioned JLR is part of the Tata Group, which is clearly a vast network of companies operating across every industry you could possibly imagine, as you know. So we're beginning to think more seriously about how can we connect our portfolio companies or the companies we invest in, or maybe even the companies we don't invest in, but we see, to others in that group. There's a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of cross company opportunities, but also opportunities where maybe we've not invested, but we could see a home for that technology. So we are more than happy to share the companies we come across with others in the Tata Group, and the same way we'd share deal flow with investors. And like I said, we're really beginning to think more carefully about that, because in my mind, that is a whole new world that we could unlock, right? We come with not just JLR, but perhaps there's opportunities with these other companies which actually are a lot larger than JLR. So let's have a follow up in a year, and I'll tell you how that's going. And it'll either be a huge success, or I would have aged about 20 years and we wouldn't have made much progress. So I'll let you know.
That's great to hear. But even the other statistic that you provided, which is 90% of your portfolios have some form of engagement with the parent, and 30% are in some kind of commercial agreement. That is a fantastic statistic. And not so many CVCs are that efficient and successful. So that's a lot to learn from the way you do things. That's amazing. And having a much bigger parent in Tata that looks at everything from consumer goods to automotive to computing, high performance computing, to everything else is something that can act as a huge accelerator. So yes, we should have this conversation a year from now. You also said something interesting, which is providing this opportunity for your startups to not just work with JLR, but the larger ecosystem. But how about them working with other portfolios within the same ecosystem? So have you had success with connecting, say, portfolio A that you invested in with portfolio B, maybe in a slightly different vertical, but they can work wonderfully well together because they are either complementary or they bring in different skill sets that can fit each other?
Yeah, great question. So it's a timely one. It's not something we've, to be totally honest, it's not something we've looked at in any great depth. Mainly because we are sort of in this transition period from legacy portfolio, where we still have fintechs in our portfolio, perhaps, or companies who are maybe not so aligned with the newer companies that we're bringing in. But it's something, again, that we're looking at more closely. And there's an investment we recently made that hasn't yet been announced, so I can't share too much information. But they're in the rare earth element space, and we actually discovered quite serendipitously that they are already speaking just to about other portfolio companies, and they're already in some form of partnership with them. Now, that didn't come from us, but what we're really excited about here is it shows we're investing across the whole value chain, and we're taking a sort of more holistic view on it, and that's where we want to get to in all of our verticals, right? We want to make sure we, and JLR, of course, are part of the entire solution rather than just a little bit of it. So we or I personally only discovered this a few weeks ago, and it made me think, or I asked myself the exact question you just asked me, which is, okay, so where are the other synergies within the portfolio? Who else can work together? I think it'll be a slow burner, but I hope that as we increase the number of new investments, I mean, maybe the 5 to 10 new investments a year, I hope as that number grows, we will almost be the puppet masters and be able to pair everyone up, because I mentioned it before, we invest globally, and there's no reason that the company we invested in America will know the company that we're going to invest in France. So I see that as a big part of my role, and then the platform suppression is connecting the dots on behalf of the founders.
What do you say anything about the challenges that you face when projects are stuck? I mean, for a few months, it's going great, and then for one reason or the other, the project gets stuck. Sometimes it could be just the value pivoting. Sometimes it could be the portfolio company pivoting, and it could be a whole lot of other reasons, right? Supply chain challenges. And we have seen a bunch of these things. So would like to learn from you if you can give any examples and how do you approach these issues, and how do you either try to unstick them or get the engagement moving forward again? Whatever makes sense in the normal course, right? So it should be an equal win for both the parties. So anything that you can share on all these files.
Yeah, and I think overcoming challenges or overcoming stuck projects is is probably the biggest challenge we face in our roles. There's always differing expectations, there's different priorities, there's budget constraints, there's changes of leadership. A lot of this stuff is completely out of our control. Um, in terms of so how do we overcome these challenges? An important element, and this goes back to the whole thesis model, is ownership. So we always try and make sure we have a very clear single internal champion stakeholder for each portfolio company. We want to know that JLR as a business are just as committed to driving value for our portfolio as we are. And our most successful collaborations, thinking about the portfolio now, the ones where we've had the most success are where there's actually a direct relationship between the business unit and a specific person on that business unit and the founder. And the best thing we can do is get out of the way. I have no interest in being the middleman. If our head of data science is speaking to our AI founder, great. We'll let it be. So for me, it's essential. Now, that's not always possible, but for me, it's essential you have a very clear understanding from the start who is involved in the project, who's the decision maker, who controls the budget, and who ultimately is the primary point of contact. And ideally, that should have been the same person that was involved. In fact, that should be the same person that was involved in the due diligence stage of the deal itself, because often the biggest blocker we face, and I'm sure you face this as well, is change of personnel, right? Your advocate leaves and then you're in trouble. Another one that I haven't heard talked about a lot is team structure within the corporate venture unit. So there's an increasing trend for CVCs, or we're seeing an increasing trend, at least here in Europe, for CVCs to hire leadership, senior management from within the mothership. And the reasons are fairly obvious, right? It's their proximity to the business itself and also to senior management. So our managing director, Mike, joined in 2022, the same time as we did the reset. He came from within the business, and we talked previously, or I talked previously, about how before 2022 or when I first joined, we really lacked the mechanisms to properly connect the portfolio to JLR. And what Mike has done very successfully is act as the bridge between our team and the senior leadership. So he champions our cause and our portfolio's cause at the highest level, and that we can all try our best to remove blockers. And I'm sure this isn't necessarily the most politically correct thing to say in a corporate context, but you can never underestimate the value of being able to go straight to the top and being able to pull rank. And to do that, you need internal credibility. And no one is more credible than someone who's spent many years within the business. So we found that blockers have been removed a lot quicker since that change. Now, before you and I are talking now, we literally, Mike and I had a meeting about how we try and change that, because it's not scalable. But it's proven to be a successful strategy so far. And I think regardless of what process you put in place, there's always value in having that direct line to the senior leadership.
Google that you say hits home absolutely. Yes. A lot of acceleration can come from going to the very top and enable that to percolate to the people who are actually engaging in the day-to-day collaboration. Very true. What, in your opinion, is a success story? Can you highlight some such cases?
Yeah, and I'll try and give some examples from the newer portfolio companies we've invested in. So we're not looking backwards, and we're still in thesis and importantly, given my role, on message and talking about the right things. An interesting place to start would probably be a company called Verax AI. So Verax, they and I'll try not to butcher this, but they essentially provide enterprise grade trust solutions for generative AI. So their software, or their control center rather, acts as a middle layer between the LLMs and the applications, allowing data teams, digital teams to I guess mitigate or avoid issues such as drift and hallucinations in generative AI answers. So we, as we talked about a lot, we've spent a lot of time with the digital team within JLR, and we know exactly what areas the business is looking at. And they're specifically, or they were very interested in safeguarding solutions to make AI more secure. Our team, or Will Morgan, he's based in the Bay Area. Our team met Leo, the founder of Verax, at an event out in Silicon Valley. They got chatting. He immediately recognized the alignment and also the impact that this technology could have on JLR. But more importantly, or just as importantly, understood this huge potential for financial returns. So Leo and Oren, the two founders, are twice exited. They sold their last business to AWS for hundreds of millions. They have a vast network and huge experience of selling to enterprise. So we thought this ticks the box strategically. It definitely ticks the box financially. We took the technology to the head of data science, Jose at JLR. He said, yeah, this is exactly what we're looking for. In almost, I think, maybe 3 weeks, we went from finding them to becoming the first strategic investor or the first OEM on the cap table, and then worked incredibly hard to support the founder from day one. And that saw us increasing our allocation in the next round. But most importantly, as it relates to the corporate side of things and the relationship, our investment in Verax at pre-seed and then seed has meant that JLR as a business are now collaborating as design partners on Verax's first product. So the data team are literally sitting with the founder, shaping the product he's building so it's built in a way that serves their needs. Now we're still in the early stages, we're still in a POC, but should it deliver the results that I'm fairly confident it will, I wouldn't be surprised if that leads to a commercial discussion. And more importantly, from Leo and Orange's point of view, I wouldn't be surprised if that then really accelerates their own trajectory, as they would have validated it with a fairly large corporate, and I'm sure they'll have no doubt raise the money. So I love this example. I think it's a great example of I guess kind of the corporate, the strategic, but also the venture and the financial worlds merging to the benefit of all parties. And again, let's check in a year and see if my prediction was right.
Umberto. So, do you have a plan to highlight some of the success stories to the corporate to encourage more of the folks in the corporate to engage with InMotion Ventures?
Another very timely question. So we are talking a huge amount at the moment about internal communications, and actually, it's something I think all CVCs need to do more of. We have always operated at the periphery, so I'm spending a lot of time at the moment with the internal comms team, trying to understand how can we showcase and celebrate the success. So, let's get very tactical. It could be, the weekly newsletters that go out within JLR. We can do in-person demo days. We can invite our founders to innovation events within the business. So we are thinking about that a huge amount at the moment, because the nature of the beast with corporations is as soon as people see something is, I guess, achieving a level of momentum and like genuinely, tangibly moving the needle, they're going to want to get involved. And going back to that conversation we had before around, are there some departments that are maybe less engaged and others that are more engaged? I am fairly confident that if we can nail that internal comms piece, we'll get a lot more engagement. So the short answer is yes. It's one of our key objectives for next year. And I would love to speak to other CVCs about how they're doing it, because it does seem like an area that perhaps isn't prioritized as much as, let's say, external comms or other parts of the fund.
And usually, the people at the leadership level are quite aware of what the corporate venture is doing, the success stories and the challenges as well. But it's equally important to have that information penetrate all the way to as many of the employees as possible, because you never know when the next spark for idea for collaboration could come from. So I was just curious to learn how large the organization is.
So in terms of UK employees, I think there's around 12,000, maybe slightly less, 10,000, and then that again globally. So we are lucky in that it's not the world's biggest business. There's maybe 20 to 30,000 employees. However, that's still not, the easiest employee base to penetrate. And I think something that we are going to have to work quite hard on is the education piece. So you and I, we live and breathe VC, we live and breathe CVC. If you speak to an engineer in the Midlands, sorry, in the UK, in Birmingham, they likely don't know much about venture capital. They maybe think of it in terms of Dragon's Den or Shark Tank, as it's called over there, let alone corporate venture capital. So often when we meet new people within JLR, the first remark they make is, I had no idea Jaguar Land Rover was investing in startups. So that's where we're starting from. So there's going to be a lot of high level education pieces before we get into the deep dive of, here is everything we're looking at, here's our thesis. But to me, it's exciting. And look, if we can't do it with 20,000 people, I don't know how we're going to do it with the a million employees Tata has. So let's start with that, and then we'll go to the other group companies.
That brings us to the end of our time. Thank you so much, Oliver, for sharing your insights, and been a pleasure talking to you. Before we close, are there any golden nuggets that you would like to share based on your personal journey with the CVC and the VC community?
So we've talked about it already, actually, a little bit. But my challenge, I suppose, is to people within the corporate venture world is to over communicate our impact. So I think most VCs are very good at telling people what value they bring, how they impact the portfolio, but most are very, very bad at actually showing people what they've done. And I'd argue, perhaps controversially, that's because a lot of investors don't actually move the needle a huge amount. But as we've talked about for this podcast, CVCs are in a very unique position in that we have a very tangible value add. And I would love to see more funds, and we're working on this ourselves next year, more funds sharing case studies, giving examples, saying we invested in company X and they have achieved Y as a result. It will undoubtedly lead to better deal flow. And now, in my view, is a fantastic time to be a corporate investor. So we need to praise the work we've done and really make the most of the market conditions.
Yes, and you, with your experience in comms, is probably uniquely positioned to really showcase some of these things. I do agree that a lot of CVCs tend to shy away from showcasing the success stories. Probably they feel that it's something that could infringe on confidentiality, but I think we need to celebrate the successes because they tend to be few and far between. And that in itself throws a spotlight on the work that the CVCs do in the innovation ecosystem and in the investment ecosystem. On that note, thank you so much, Oliver, for sharing your insights and giving us your time.
Thanks, Geetha. Thoroughly enjoyed it.